Good morning. While we're waiting to get synced up across all platforms, talk to me. What time is it where you're at? Where are you guys from? Waiting to get some people on here. Asheboro. That's where the zoo is, right? Johannesburg. What time is it there? Wow. We got some people from Maryland, Kentucky, Florida, Puerto Rico, Melbourne, Florida, Russia. Tell me what time it is where you're at. It's about to be 7 a.m. here. Well, we're live. Good morning and welcome to this edition of 7 at 7. I'm so glad to be able to have the opportunity to do this devotional today. If this is your first time joining in with us, 7 at 7 is a daily devotional at 7 a.m. where we're going through Pastor Stephen's book, 7 Mile Miracle, just walking through the last 7 statements of Jesus before he died. It's been amazing. But before I get into the devotional, let me introduce myself. My name is Chet Pete, and I am the Associate Campus Pastor at the one and only University City. Good morning, UC. How you guys feeling? I have the privilege of serving up underneath Pastor Larry Bry. Love you, LB. And I'm married to the beautiful Whitney Pete. I'll go ahead and get me some brownie points in. One thing I'll say about my wife, Whitney, is she's probably the most joyful person in the world. Anybody that meets her, that's usually what they say. And we've been blessed to have identical twin boys, Carson and Carter. They're 5 years old and they just started kindergarten. Now, my boys are typical 5-year-old boys, rambunctious, wild. They're constantly jumping over things and knocking stuff over. There's something else. But one question I get asked all the time about Carson and Carter, because they're identical, is how do I tell them apart? I mean, it's an easy question for me to answer, but it's because they belong to me. They're mine. They're my boys. Now, sometimes I got to pull them real close when they start acting up and remind them. I say, do you know who you belong to? Just to make sure that they get it together, and they'll usually say, Daddy. But I'm ready to go ahead and jump into the devotional. This week we are talking about a word of salvation. And pretty much where we're at in the story is Jesus is on the cross. And he's surrounded by criminals, some people who've done a lot of bad things. And one of the criminals says to Jesus, please remember me when you enter into your kingdom. And Jesus responds to him and he says, today you will be with me in paradise. We believe that that was a moment of salvation, that in that moment that his sins were forgiven and that he was going to have an opportunity to go to heaven. And today we're going to talk about a specific part of salvation today that's found in the book, in Pastor Stephen's 7 Mile Miracle book. And we're going to read it today. It's on page 47. On page 47 in the book, he gives a really cool definition of salvation. He says, you belong to Jesus now. You belong with Jesus. He's going to take you with him where he is into the presence of God. This is salvation. This is the gift of God. I'm going to ask you, just like I asked my boys, do you know who you belong to? Now, if we were at UC, I expect you to shout back at me and you say, I belong to Jesus. You can type it to me now. Go ahead and just say, I belong to Jesus. Now, it's exciting to talk about that we belong to Jesus and how good he is to us. But I believe that the tension that we live in is that we know that we belong to Jesus. We've given our life to him. But yet we still live this life sometimes frustrated because we feel like we don't fit in. We feel like there's no place for us. And so that's why I want to spend the rest of our time talking about today. Is how can you feel like you belong, but still feel like you don't fit in? It made me think about this story when I was in high school. I played basketball. I was pretty good if I say so myself. I wasn't too bad. And I loved basketball. But in middle school, I played basketball and football. Didn't like football too much, but the only reason I played was because my friends played. They wanted me to hang out with them and be able to spend more time with them, so I played football. Well, going into the 8th grade year, I was starting to get pretty serious. I started to play AAU basketball, and so then I would transition and play football in the fall. My dad pulled me aside before the football season started, and he said, "Hey, Chet, I don't think you should play football. I think it's a bit dangerous. You don't belong on the football field if you're going to be a basketball player." I said, "Nah, Dad, I'm fine. This is my 8th grade year. I won't play football when we get into high school. This will be my last year. I'll just play with my friends this year, and that'll be it." Well, I went on ahead and I played. He let me play. Before the season started, we were in a scrimmage in practice. I got tackled by probably the biggest guy on our team, and I broke 2 bones on my leg. I can remember the pain I felt, but I can remember the most is my dad saying to me, "You don't belong on the football field." I believe that that's like some of us, that we're trying to fit into places that we don't belong. And most of the time, anytime that you do that, anytime that you try to fit into places that you don't belong, you'll almost always end up broken. Maybe you're trying to fit into relationships that you don't have any business being in, and it's breaking you up. Or there's some relationships that you're in right now that probably need to end, and they're just leaving you broken. Another thing that we constantly do that makes us feel like we don't belong is that we live in a constant cycle of comparison. I have to admit, even in preparing for this 7 at 7 today, I started to think, I have the privilege of working at a church with so many great leaders and communicators and teachers, and they chose me to be able to do this devotional. I started to immediately disqualify myself and say, hold on, LB can do this, or why not Wade Joy, or even Pastor Stephen, one of the greatest communicators ever. Me? Well, I had to remind myself of who I belong to. I had to remind myself that I needed to stop comparing and remember that I'm chosen. 1 Peter 2:9 says, "But you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood." I come to remind you today that God chose you, and that we need to constantly remember that we belong to Him. Belonging is so important that Jesus went to a cross, a place that He didn't belong, because He's without sin. He did no wrong, a place that He didn't belong, to give you a place to belong. And so today, I hope that this encourages you, that you walk with your head a little bit higher. You walk with a little bit more confidence, knowing that you belong to Jesus, the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, that He chose you. What do you do with this? Maybe for some of you, you need to get involved in a group. You need to be around another group of believers that can constantly affirm what Jesus says about you. So join an e-group. The E-Fam, love you guys. Make sure you continue to tune in. We have online e-groups that are going on that you can get connected to as well. But it's awesome to belong to a group of believers that can constantly remind you of what God says about you. So before I go, I just want to remind you to please pick up 7 Mile Miracle. This book is so powerful, going through the last 7 statements of Jesus. I hope that this helped you today. And I want to remind you before you go, you belong to Jesus. Love you. Have a good day.